today I'm going to talk about Indigenous African religions. In this video, I'll kind of just discuss the overall context and how the narratives and stories are embedded. And then in the next video, I'll talk about more of the sociopolitical context of it all. So there is no one Indigenous African religion. There's a multiplicity. Africa itself is an extremely diverse continent when it comes to the cultural, linguistic, and ethnic backgrounds of the individuals who live there. So with North Africa, you'll see that it is predominantly Muslim, but throughout sub-Saharan Africa, you'll see that it's kind of a combination of Christian and Indigenous African religions that are being practiced there. And what you'll also see is that there's a combination of these different religions being practiced. So people still practice Indigenous African religions, but they combine it with aspects or elements of Christianity and Islam. So like I said, there is no one African religion. Through trade, through colonization, and just general globalization, we see how there are multiple types of religions practiced throughout such a huge and diverse continent. Now, there are a couple of unifying themes for these different Indigenous African religions where you'll see there are many ceremonies that embody and celebrate the rites of passage for individuals. So this is not just particular to Indigenous African religions. This is also particular to Judeo-Christian religions. So rites of passage that embody birth and adulthood and death. And also a unifying factor is that religion is part of the everyday life of individuals amongst these African countries. So mythic narratives are a major component of various African Indigenous philosophies and religions. And when we hear the word myth, I think we tend to think that it's not valid, it's not true, it doesn't make sense. But the way that we're talking about myths in this context is just that they're essential teachings infused into the religions, into the stories that are told about these religions. So this exists for pretty much every religion that we know about. And myths are not necessarily falsehoods, right? But they're stories or narratives. And they are narratives about the human condition, and they oftentimes have a moral component to them to try to teach people a lesson about what you should be doing or what you shouldn't be doing. So these myths contain stories about heroes, gods, demigods, spirits, demons. They tell the origins of humanity, stories about humanity started, how humanity changed over time, and then how supernatural beings have existed amongst humanity and how human beings can interact with these supernatural beings through different traditions and rituals. These stories or these myths have been told through oral traditions, through people verbally talking about them and passing them down to their children and their families. And what's interesting about these myths is that they're not really about the origin of the cosmos or the universe, but they're about the origins of humanity with moral messages infused. So they're metaphysical with respect to reality, but they're also ontological with respect to how human beings started, and they're also ethical with respect to what humans should and shouldn't be doing. You'll see a supernatural component to many of these Indigenous African religions where there are, many gods. There is a theistic component. There's also a polytheistic component with many gods. And you have, just like with so many other religions, you have a supreme deity, a major kind of high god that is the creator of the universe, that is everywhere, that is all-knowing, that is all-powerful, that is connected to nature and eternity and the creator basically of everything. And you can also be a god but have human-like attributes. And what's interesting about some of the gods and demigods is that they have both masculine and feminine energy and characteristics and traits. There is kind of a theme of androgyny amongst many of the gods. An example of a god within African Indigenous religions is Oshun, who is a goddess of fertility and nature. And you'll see that many of the gods that are associated with nature are women, or they're thought to be women and kind of possess more feminine qualities. So the gods can live amongst human beings, they can have human-like attributes, and they can also be kind of the space in which human beings can interact with them can be temples and shrines where rites of passages can occur and different traditions and customs can be embodied. So another kind of dimension of existence, right? You have this high God, you have other gods, you have these demigods, you also have spirits. Spirits occupy this interesting space between the human world and also the supernatural world, or the world of the gods, the phases between life and death. And so the spirits kind of represent this transition from one spiritual state to another. That's one of the reasons why there's this great respect for elders within various African cultures, specifically with Indigenous African philosophy, is that elders are thought to be connected to the spiritual world because they're closer to that stage of life, they're closer to death, so they should be respected. Spirits also illustrate the connection that human beings have with gods and demigods, so they need to be respected. Spirits are also thought to kind of uphold the cultural values of a family, and that's one of the reasons families need to be very unified as a way of connecting to these spirits, which are our connection to other realms in the supernatural realm. So what's interesting is that you'll see that even though there is this notion of divinity and spirits and supernatural, they're very human-centered. So there is an anthropocentrism within many African religions where it's human-centered. It's focusing on how humanity was created. The stories and the narratives about humanity have to do with how humanity is at the center of the cosmos rather than just existing in relation to the cosmos. And the stories have to do with humanity's kind of connection to the cosmos rather than just the universe and the creation of the cosmos in itself. You also see how there is some theories discuss and some narratives discuss how everyone could have a dual male and female soul, which is interesting to think about, so that we see that theme of androgyny again. And we also have seen this theme of androgyny throughout other religions and ancient Greek theories as well. And how did human beings kind of diverge from these gods? Well, it was told that the higher god used to live amongst human beings, but human beings kind of ruined it. And so humans were greedy and corrupt, and so the high god decided to leave. And that's kind of the origin story for why we see so much suffering and pain, because human beings kind of drove out what was so good through our greed and corruption and evil. So that's why we really have to kind of respect the customs and the traditions and the morals of these myths to help us not completely be consumed by our evil desires and wanting more constantly.